Hello and welcome to another TOG chat. I'm Bob Osborne, principal of the Osborne Group, and I'm joined by my colleague Laurel McCombs. How are you, Laurel?
I'm good.
Good, good. So I thought we would talk today about events. We're getting into event season. We know that many of you out there that may be watching this video have events, maybe have a big signature event of some kind, maybe are doing some smaller events right now, maybe a little of both. And so we thought we would kick off event season by just having a little talk about, how events according to the Osborne group. And I know we both have a lot of thoughts and opinions about this. And so I'm curious, Laurel, like in your opinion, like what's the biggest either mistake that people make or the most important thing they should be taking into account when they start thinking about their event?
Yeah, and to be clear, I think the first thing to clarify is events can mean a lot of things in the nonprofit sector and to development, right? And I think you and I are both big proponents of small vision-based, mission and vision-based events where you really have an opportunity to engage with folks. But as we enter the spring, that is probably less so the events that we're talking about. We're probably more so, to your point, talking about kind of some of the bigger kind of signature events that folks are running. And if I had to, I think there's a lot of challenges with events. Obviously, we all know the headlines about low ROI. That's not even including staff time and energy, the burnout that events can cause. And to some extent, I'm okay with you having a lower return financially on an event if you have are also factoring in that you're achieving other goals and objectives with your event. But I think far too often what I see are folks who do really big events and really only have in mind their revenue goal. And then when they don't meet their revenue goal, then come back and say, oh, but it, really helps with word of mouth. And it really helps, bring in new folks that weren't engaged before. And, all of these outcomes that are really great outcomes, but I don't want folks to back into those outcomes. Like I don't want those to be the excuses we use when the event doesn't provide the financial return we hope it does. I want those outcomes to be thoughtful and strategic and part of your planning when you're doing your event. And so that's something that jumps out at me. Is just, we know events are never going to have the financial return on investment that other strategies do. And that is what it is. And I'm not saying don't do events because of it, but be really intentional and know why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think you're right. Like the thing that events most of the time, there are some notable exceptions to this, but I think, doing this for 20 some odd years, I think it's rare that I run across events that revenue generation was the main point of it, and what they were successfully, meeting their goals in terms of revenue generation, and it was a worthwhile in terms of opportunity cost, meaning like comparing it to the other things you could be doing that take up the same amount of time. Could you have had a higher return doing those other activities? And I think most of the time the answer is yeah, the opportunity cost for an event is quite high, and you're probably better off doing those other things if the only reason you're doing this was to raise money, again with some notable exceptions. But yeah, to your point, I mean, it can be great in terms of creating community and letting people know that they are not alone, that there's other folks that care about this cause as well, and being part of that community and being together, I think can actually be quite valuable. I think it could be a great way to engage your volunteers and surface new volunteers of some kind. Engage your board members, find new board members, new committee members. I think it could be really valuable in terms of that. But to your point, like, all these things have to be done intentionally, and they almost never are. And so how many times have you and I run across people that agree with everything we're saying, and yet are in this right now planning an event that from top to bottom of the organization, at least from the staff perspective, they're like, this stinks. I would rather not be doing it. We should be doing something else. And yet they still will do that event. And I think some of that is like a lack of I think some of it is just this is what we do and we've always been doing it. We don't know how to stop doing it. I think some of it is this is the thing our board understands, and it's the way to engage them. And so we agree that we shouldn't be doing this. But it's going to be too hard or too much work to convince our board, and so we continue along our merry way. And again, it might be fine if we had different expectations, but usually we don't. Usually the expectation is the money.
Yeah, and I think there's some of those factors that are real and some of the factors that I'm more willing to push back on. So I think I have a couple clients actually who are very event heavy, and want to not get rid of their events. I think when we think about lessening the piece of the pie that events are in your revenue structure, it's not because we want to make less money from events. It's ideally because we want to make more money from all of the other strategies, right? We just want to make our pie bigger, and that requires long-term planning and intentionality, right? So we don't become less reliant on our events by just hoping that we will, right? It requires us to have a long-term strategy, and it doesn't happen in a year, right? This is the other reality. As I'm one client in particular, this is a multi-year strategy to say we want to raise more money overall as an organization. We know events, which is what we've relied on most, is not going to be the way that we're going to 2x our budget. So how do we continue to do our events effectively so that we don't, because they can't lose that revenue, right? Like that's not an option. You can't just pull the plug and be like, yoink, we're stopping these events. We're not gonna have this revenue anymore. So how do you either phase out events over time by then replacing it with other revenue, or keep events where they are while you build up other revenue sources, right? So there's like, that's like absolutely legitimate to me. I think one of the arguments I hear far too often as a reason to keep events is like, we'll lose donors if we don't have this event. And Laurel and her love of hyperbole, so here we go again. Like, I would say if the only reason the only reason somebody wants to give to you is because you give them a fun party, we don't need them to be our donors, right? Like, that's Laurel's hyperbolic statement about that. Like, and obviously I recognize there's some middle ground in there, and we really want to try to keep people, but there, and I also think we overestimate how much people come to our events to have fun, because I always think, like, if all I was looking for was a good time, there are 100 other things happening in my community on a Friday night besides me coming to your event. Like, that isn't the reason. Yes, I want to have fun when I come to your event, but let's give donors some credit that that's not the core reason they're coming. And so, let's create our events so that they are really mission and vision focused, and so that is the kind of driving factor around them.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with 90% of what you said. My only pushback, I would say, is like some organizations should stop their event.
Oh,
And
for sure, for
yeah,
sure. Yes. No, no, no. I
you
I
know,
100% agree with that. Yeah. Some
yeah,
events need to stop and should have stopped a long time ago.
exactly. And I think you just have to do the calculation, because I think reasonably often will, to your point, I don't think it is hyperbole. I think very often, if you actually go down your list, if you just solicited those people, to your point, like, they care about the organization. They don't need to go to an event to give you that same amount of money. In our heads, we think that they do. When a lot of them might be grateful to not have to go to your event. They may be just happy to make that donation. And I personally, I always find it painful to give to events, just because I'm like, so much of the money goes to overhead, and I just rather you just use this money. Now, in some instances, like one of the boards I'm on, the event serves a much bigger purpose of, again, of bringing in community. And so there's real value. Like this is the time when a very large New York City community is able to kind of come together around a cause. And I think that's important. But most of the time, like, I'll just give you, give you some money. And the other thing too, I think, is um, it can often be a real hindrance to having a major gift, or like a true major gift program. Just the amount of time it takes, the amount of staff time, the amount of staff resources it takes, sometimes can make another resource intensive activity, which is major gifts at scale. It just takes away from your ability to do that. Except one of those has a 2-to-1 return on investment, and the other one has an 8-to-1 return on investment. And we'll let you guess which one is which. So I think, again, to your earlier point, it's really like, why are we doing this? What are our expectations? And then doing the analysis. Are we getting what we want to get out of it? What is our return on investment? However you're measuring that. That could be money, it could be something else as well. But to just really be honest with yourself and really decide whether you need to do this event or not. And again, we're talking about big events. I think, again, and we should probably reserve a little time to talk about small events, which I think you and I think we should be doing more of and not less of. But in terms of these big events, I think you just have to be honest with yourself as an organization and do the analysis, and really think about, are we getting out of this what we thought we would get out of it, and could we get this some other way that is less resource intensive and has a higher return on investment.
Yeah, I 100%. And I think that again, we make a lot of assumptions for our donors and for our event attendees. And I hear folks say things like, "Oh, well, they would just be up in arms if we did that," or that they would just revolt if we did that. And I think, well, have you talked to them? Like, do you know that for a fact? And for probably the small percentage of folks who, if you took some of the bells and whistles off of your event, and maybe had less swag at the event, and maybe had a more simple menu, right? I push back on the folks who wouldn't come anymore because of that, and I say, I'm not here to be your party planner. Like, I mean, yes, I'm throwing a party, so I'm a party planner, but I'm not here, like, there's a core reason we're doing this, and there's going to be a core reason we may cut back on some of the bells and whistles for our events to increase our return on investment on this. And if a donor isn't supportive of that, I have to question their commitment to our actual mission and vision, because then it does feel like they're just coming to have fun, in which case I say, like, there's a really nice restaurant down the street that you can go get a really fancy dinner at, right? And so and I think, I to your point about, like, do our donors want all of this, and would they rather just come to a smaller event or just write a check? Have we asked them that? So I always think, how are you building into your prep and your follow-up for your event some actual discussions and surveying, and not just, I think a lot of folks do post-event surveys that are like, did you like the meal? Like, was the presentation good, right? But I think maybe some more substantive things like, how else would you like to be involved in the organization? Are there, other ways that you'd like to support us or get involved? And then actually having maybe some focus groups or some one-on-one conversations with folks who've been coming for a long time, maybe even some folks who came for the first time, right? To just get their thoughts and feedback, because, I think we're making a lot of these decisions based on the input of a small number of volunteers, and or the assumptions of staff. And I think we need to broaden that out a little bit. Yeah. So, I think, again, not saying don't everyone needs to stop their big signature gala, saying maybe some folks need to stop their big signature events. And other people, I think, just need to really think about, how do we create efficiencies and higher return? I also, one other thought before we move on to small events. I one of the things I hear from folks a lot is, it brings in new community, it introduces us to people. And then I say, great. So what kind of follow-up are you doing with
Hmm.
those folks? And they're like, oh, well, they get put on the list for the event next year. And I think, well, if legitimately one of your goals and outcomes for an event is to engage people and bring new people and engage people who've been around more, right? Then we need to be following up with them and actually doing that engagement work, not just as it relates to the event, but as it relates to our organization. So, what is the follow up that says, how else do you want to get involved? Here's some other things you could do. Here's some other small events we've got. Here's some volunteer opportunities. Here's some advocacy opportunities, whatever it might be. So, because otherwise, again, you're bringing all of these people together and then saying, okay, well, you'll probably get a save the date postcard in 10 months. So again, missed opportunities. So if you're going to do a big event that does require a lot of staff time and a lot of resources, just make sure you're getting everything out of it that you can. So I don't know, any other thoughts on big events before we talk about
Uh,
events?
no, well, I guess one very quick thought is if you have a ton of corporate donors,
Yeah,
maybe do an event, big of a signature event, because it's easy and it's just kind of money collecting, and corporations sort of get it and are sort of oriented towards it. And so I think that's a time, that's the one time I tell a client you should proactively do an event if you have all these corporate supporters, or you think you can have a lot of corporate supporters. It's maybe a little bit worth it. But otherwise, again, revenue, if the goal is to make money, probably think of something else. If the goal is to make money and build community and as a point of entry and whatever other goals you have, then yeah, you can consider it, to your point, as long as you also follow up and actually make use of that opportunity.
yeah,
But yeah, let's pivot a little bit to small events, of which I think you and I are both a big fan of. And so when we talk about small events, the way I always describe it is a room and enough food and or beverage that people aren't starving or really, really thirsty. And so that doesn't have to be much at all. I've held many events in a law offices, boardroom or just a conference room with some coffee, depending on the time of day, maybe a little bit of wine or beer if it's in the evening, maybe bagels in the morning, but again, like just put people in a room, and as to your earlier point, a vision oriented event where we're in and out, we're hitting it hard, and we're really talking about our forward looking vision. And again, the event part of it is really a tool and an opportunity for people who might not otherwise take a one-on-one meeting with us, but to bring them into a room to see who really might be interested in being a supporter of the organization, and to do it in a way that's efficient and hard hitting, and that doesn't cost much for the organization. You can do. I remember my first job, we went from maybe 500 supporters to like 4 or 5,000 supporters over the course of 2 or 3 years. The vast majority of those new supporters, we did have a big gala, but that's not really where most people came in. It really was these smaller events. And so you can have a lot of these if you're kind of thinking about it that way. A room and some Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Like, it really doesn't have to be more more than that.
yeah. And or it could be more if somebody wanted to make it more, right? So if you have a board member or another current donor who says, I've got some colleagues and friends that I want to hear more about this mission, and I'm going to host it at my house, and maybe they do a whole big spread. That's totally up to them. But yeah, I think to your point, there's not, I always, when I talk to folks about vision meetings, I always say, like, there's a couple of key things that we hope you'll keep in mind when you do a vision meeting, but other than that, there's not a formula. Like, we are, to your point, feel pretty strongly there's got to be a focus on vision. Where are you going? What's going to be different because of the work your organization's doing? And there's got to be two-way dialogue, right? We've got to create opportunities, not just for us to put on our dog and pony show and talk about ourselves, but to actually have dialogue with the folks that come and hear from them. What resonated with you? What's exciting you about this vision? What do you care about as it relates to our vision? And then follow up, right? That again, like we talked about with big events, there's no, don't go out and do a bunch of these small events if you also don't have any intention of following up with these folks. Because, you know, I think I have seen people who have gone out and scheduled a bunch of vision meetings and done all the things that did none of the follow up and kind of came back and said we didn't make any money. I said, well, you didn't follow up with anybody, right?
Anything, right?
We also, I think we also would say pretty strongly, like, these are not fundraising events. These are not, you know, places where you invite and then the host says, okay, everybody get out your checkbook and write a check for $100. Like, I think this is a non-ask, get to, you know, meet, hear from you, hear from us kind of thing. And, you know, the ask will come further down the road. I also think too, the role of small events in engagement. You know, you and I have been talking a lot lately about the role of engagement. We did a whole other chat a few months ago about why engagement really matters, and particularly engagement at the smaller dollar level and the mid-level, right? And there's something to me about the role of small events for ongoing engagement of our existing donors. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts. You know, we talked earlier about kind of building, you know, events as ways to build community. And I think that there's something really simple and beautiful about the idea of just having events that bring our communities together to just be in a space, right? Like, that don't have, like aren't, and that in and of itself, if again, we're focusing on mission and vision, we're allowing for dialogue, and we're doing follow-up, though if we're doing all those things, that just creating those spaces can be really powerful. But I'm curious what your thoughts are.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, I think it's an excellent way to steward people. It's an excellent way to cultivate people. It's an excellent point of entry. You know, it can serve in all of those because again, we're really just talking about our forward vision and what we're doing, and we're having a conversation with people, and you'll quickly be able to kind of see who's a part of that, you know, who wants to be part of that journey with you, and who doesn't. And just the opportunity to get together with people, I think, is really valuable, particularly, you know, as the pandemic you know, recedes into the distance and gets further and further away. I don't know that we've revived this part of our lives. And I know that when I've had an opportunity to do that, it's really been valuable to me, and I've gotten a lot out of it. And I think the organizations that have sponsored these events have gotten a lot out of it too. It's not always super tangible exactly what that is, but it's you know, it's enrolling people, right? And all the personal capital that they bring to the table because they feel like they're part of something, and have some, you know, thoughts and ideas, and want the same vision as you. I mean, anything you can do to get people to buy into your vision of the world is you know, foundational, right, to any further fundraising that you're going to do from those folks. Which brings me back to, I want to emphasize something that you said, which is to not solicit people at these events, which is not the same as saying that you won't ever solicit them. You should solicit them. You should come in, and eventually you should solicit them. And eventually it can be within a month or two, you know, depending on your schedule. But now they know what they're being solicited for. And I think a lot of people who are, you know, smaller organizations or newer organizations or less experienced people will tend to think about, well, we're going to charge, because how could we spend this time and effort and not ask for money? And one, you're probably depressing the number of people that were going to come in the first place. You know, if I think I'm going to be solicited and I don't care about this organization yet or what it is you're doing, am I going to come to your event? No, I'm not going to come to your event. I'm going to avoid your event, actively avoid your event, because I know that ask is coming. And if I've just learned about what it is you're doing, maybe I'll give you something if I'm really moved. But I don't. I don't carry a checkbook around. Do people have checkbooks? I mean, I have one. I use it for one thing. Uh,
For
I
what,
use it for my life insurance. That's it. But I don't have
right?
to. It's just because I've
HOA.
been lazy. Yeah, exactly. I'm just lazy about setting my life insurance up online. But but eventually I'll probably get sick of writing that check, and then I won't need a checkbook at all. We've had it, I think, for 10 years. It's the same. It's the same checks. The point being is like you're not in a position or in a frame of mind really to write a big check, right? And even if I wanted to do that, like, how is my wife going to feel about it? How is your partner going to feel? Yeah, there's a limit, right, to the kind of check that you're going to write spontaneously on the spot,
It's a
both from your
it's a
own.
thoughtless check, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Here's
it's a
50
it's a
bucks.
knee jerk check.
Right.
It's not a let me really think about who else I'm giving to, and yeah, let me talk to my significant other about, you know, how this fits in with the rest of our philanthropy. Yeah, like it's not, and yeah, and so I think that is the other, return on investment. Like, don't kid yourself that because you've got money in hand when you walk out of that event that you've done better than if you didn't ask, right?
Exactly.
And in fact, you probably have done yourself worse off because now you're stuck in a role, in a position where, yeah, you can go and start to steward those folks and start to get them engaged, but you're not going out and asking them again for another 6 months at least, probably. And I'm always thoughtful of, the when people talk about getting a new job and like how important it is when you negotiate your very first salary in a new
Mm,
job, right? Because all of your pay raises and all of everything that comes for the rest of your time at that organization ultimately hinges on that very first the very first negotiated salary. And I always think about that with gifts. I'm like, so if I can have a bunch of people come to a massive gala and pay $100 to come, and then maybe they spend another 50 $100 on things while they're there, I get a couple $100 from folks. That's like their baseline. That's the baseline I'm starting with. But if I can
mm.
invite the same people to a small event, get them really get to know them, hear about their motivations and their interests, have them hear really good inspiring stuff about our vision and mission, and then follow up with them in a one-on-one personalized way to say, how would you feel about making a gift of $1,000? Right, we've now moved our baseline gift by just a different strategy of acquisition, right, from 100 to 50 to 1,000, and now that's the baseline we're going to build from for the rest of our relationship with that donor, right? So just from that perspective, I think they're like constituent lifetime value, like I'd much rather start that lifetime value at a higher
Yeah.
point, right?
Absolutely. So I think we probably need to wrap up. Do you have any final thoughts for people on events? Probably people are having events, whether they should or should not. They're happening. Any thoughts just generally or about maybe how to do those events really well, given that we are going to do them?
Yeah, I guess my bullet points would be my big bullet points would be talk to your folks, like actually talk to the people who are coming to your event and not just your small group of very vocal folks, but everyone. Look for ways to create efficiencies in your event. Where can you cut some of the bells and whistles to increase your ROI? That's just a fairly increased budget, increase revenue, lower expense, right? How can you just really tangibly do those two things this year? And then as you're planning, just be really clear about what other outcomes you want to plan for. And Baba, it just occurred to me, I think we're kind of due for a little website update. I think maybe we'll put some of our event resources up on our resources page of our website,
Sure.
including we have kind of a special events decision points tool that kind of walks you through some of the other outcomes that you might get out of your events. So go check out the resources page on our website for that. And we'll put up some vision meeting tools as well for you all. But yeah, Bob, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thought is just to make sure that you talk about your forward vision at your event, whatever kind of event that you're having, not just the things you've done in the past, which are already paid for and already done, but you know, what are you moving towards? What do you want people to engage with and enroll with going forward? You know, I think that's one big takeaway. And then two is keep it short and sweet. Like, you know, you can have, I think, the program part, you know, I think people are willing to put up with a certain amount of time, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of program. Once you start getting past that, you're pushing it. But even that, like, I think if you can get people out of the room in 2 hours, you know, then, you know, that, I think that is a good event. Like I once did like an informal survey years ago about like what made a good event with people. And almost everyone to a person said, if I'm out of there in 2 hours, if it does, it almost doesn't matter how awesome it was. If it lasted 3 hours, people are like, that's long. If it was two, it doesn't really, like, even if you just sat there at your seat with just some water, people are like, okay, that was pretty good. You know, so keep it short, keep it sweet, and you can always have people have the opportunity to stay a little longer if they want to.
Mhm.
Um, but to make the formal part of the program, you know, hard hitting, vision forward, and keep it, you know, keep it moving along. So that was
And regardless, I guess the dot I'll put on small event, big event, whatever, follow up.
follow up.
Don't do events for event's sake. It's got to be part of a
Yeah.
continuum.
Otherwise, it's just a nice party that people will forget about in a few weeks.
That's
So,
right.
all right. Well, thanks for joining me, Laurel, and to talk about events. And yeah, we'll be back in a few weeks to talk about whatever else is on our mind in that, in that period of time. But until then, thanks for joining us.